I'm taking 70% of your fortune. That includes the inheritance from your father. My name is Paul. I'm 32 and I built my own construction rental company. Home is Phoenix, Arizona, and business is my life. Those venomous words came from Victoria, the woman I once trusted. She spoke with a smile sharp enough to slice through glass. The courtroom was full of lawyers, press, and strangers. She thought she had already won. 3 short years of marriage, and she believed that my empire was hers. Everything my father and I built over decades, gone. I sat silently at the defense table, studying her arrogance. Her attorney shuffled papers with greedy confidence. Her smirk said this was the biggest payday of his life. Victoria wore a navy dress she saved for her victories. Naturally, she bought it with my credit card. Her blonde hair was in a tight bun, her tower look. She kept glancing back at her friends who came to witness her win. This was her big show. But I had sensed something was wrong long before today. For months, Victoria had been digging into my finances. Not small talk, calculated, targeted questions. She asked about property values and investments. She probed about my father's will after his death. And the moment I inherited $3.8 million, she changed. Suddenly, the legal details of our marriage fascinated her. Her curiosity wasn't love, it was calculation. She stopped pretending to care about my work. No more, "How was your day?" Most nights she was glued to her phone, texting strangers. If I asked who, she'd snap, "Just friends." Credit card bills exploded with designer stores and fine dining. Places I'd never heard of, meals I'd never eaten. But the real betrayal was how she spoke about us. At a dinner party, I overheard her say, "I'll finally get what's mine." When I asked later, she brushed it off as work talk. But she hadn't worked in 18 months. The judge called the court to order. Her attorney launched into talk of marital property and fair division. Victoria nodded as if the money was already in her account. Her smug look said she believed I wouldn't fight, that I was too naive to protect myself. But there was something she didn't know. Before my father died, he taught me one powerful lesson. Trust is earned, he'd say, but protection is built. And sometimes the people closest to you need guarding against. I met Victoria 4 years ago in Tucson. She worked in tech marketing, charming and magnetic. She had a way of making me feel like the only man in the room. She admired the company I built with my father. It started with 2 bulldozers and a dream. 30 years later, we were the biggest rental operation in the Southwest. 6 months after we met, Victoria moved in with me. She was attentive and supportive, everything I thought I needed. She said she understood the long hours. When my father fell ill, she was there through it all. Every appointment, every sleepless night, she was by my side. At his funeral, she held my hand and promised to honor his legacy. But now I realize the warning signs were there all along. Victoria's taste was far richer than her paycheck, and she always demanded more. The little gifts I gave her stopped being enough. She wanted luxury vacations, designer bags, and influence. The woman I loved was turning into someone I barely knew. But I ignored the signs, blinded by love. By the time I noticed the manipulation, it was too late. She had woven herself into every part of my life. And now she was trying to carve it apart in court. But what she didn't realize was that I had prepared for this moment. Every contract, every trust, every dollar protected. Because my father's words had never left me. Protect your heart, he'd said, but guard your legacy even more. And that's exactly what I had done. Now, as Victoria plotted her victory, I quietly planned mine. This courtroom wasn't the end. It was the turning point. She thought she had already won. But the truth was, the game had just begun. And I wasn't going to lose everything I'd built. Not to greed, not to betrayal, not to the woman I once believed in.
This wasn't about love anymore. It was about survival, and I was ready to fight. Whatever it took, justice would be mine. And as the courtroom fell silent, I knew one thing for certain. Victoria had underestimated the man she betrayed, and soon she would regret it. Because this story wasn't about what she took, but what she lost. And when the dust settled, I would still have everything that mattered: my company, my future, my dignity. She could have shared it all, but instead she chose war. And in war, there are no guarantees, only winners and losers. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. Not to her, not ever. She had built her castle on lies, and it was about to crumble. I would walk out of this courtroom stronger than I had ever been, and she would walk away empty-handed, because greed always destroys itself in the end, and Victoria was about to learn that lesson the hard way. In trying to take everything, she was about to lose it all.
Eat at the priciest spots in town, buy boutique outfits downtown, and book weekend escapes at luxury resorts. When I asked about the spending, she would say she worked hard and deserved good things. I paid without arguing. I loved her and I could cover it. The real change came right after we got married 3 years ago. 6 months in, Victoria quit her job, saying she would focus on supporting my career. That support mostly looked like spending my money and complaining when I worked late. She started bringing up our assets and our future in a way that made me uneasy. When I mentioned keeping some business accounts separate, she accused me of failing to trust her. My father had always guarded the family wealth. He earned it through careful planning and hard work, and he taught me to take legal safeguards seriously. When Victoria and I got engaged, he insisted we sign a prenuptial agreement. "It is not about love, son," he said. "It is about protecting what we have built for the next generation." Victoria pushed back at first, saying it proved I didn't trust her. But my father's lawyer, William Garrett, calmly explained the prenups are standard for anyone with substantial assets. Victoria finally signed, though she kept complaining about how cold and unromantic it felt. She said she hardly read it because she trusted me. The agreement was thorough and clear. It shielded premarital assets, inheritances, and business interests. She would get half of anything we acquired together during marriage. But everything I built before we met and everything I inherited would remain solely mine. I once thought the prenup was just a formality, a document to ease my father's mind. I never believed I'd truly need it. But as Victoria's intentions surfaced, I realized my father had seen further than I did. The moment it all clicked,
The clearest sign came 3 weeks ago. I came home early from a job site and found Victoria in my home office on the phone with financial papers spread across my desk. She was reading figures from my father's estate to someone on the line. Yes, $3.88 million in property and investments, she said, clear as day. Plus, the company is valued near $6 million. This is going to be huge. When she saw me in the doorway, her face went pale. She hung up fast and scrambled together the papers. "Oh, hi, honey. I was just organizing your files. Who were you talking to?" I asked. "Nobody important, just my sister." But her sister lived in Seattle and rarely called, and I had never given Victoria permission to sift through estate records. Those papers were kept in my office safe, which meant she had somehow learned the combination. I said nothing that day. I nodded and walked away. But inside, something settled into place. Victoria was not helping me organize. She was adding up what she could seize. Over the next few days, I watched more closely. She made calls when she thought I was out of earshot. Victoria casually dropped terms like community property and marital assets into conversation. She even asked about finding a good divorce attorney, pretending it was for a friend. The last straw came when I checked our joint credit card. Victoria had charged thousands to a legal consultation service 2 months earlier. I called the number. It was a family law firm downtown. The receptionist confirmed Victoria was a client. My wife had been planning a divorce and aiming to take half of everything she could touch. The mask had slipped. The plan was in motion. I realized I had to prepare. Quietly, carefully, I gathered proof, not out of spite, but to defend what my father and I built with our hands. She was coming for it, and I would not let her.
For at least 2 months, she'd been secretly collecting financial data, meeting with lawyers, and planning her big payday, all while sharing my bed and spending my money. At night, I sat in my truck outside the equipment yard for over an hour, watching the orange sunset spill across the mountains. I wasn't furious, just deeply let down. Let down that someone I once loved and trusted had reduced our marriage to a cold financial transaction. Let down that my father's constant warnings about protecting the family's work had been necessary after all. But beneath the disappointment, another feeling stirred. Relief. Relief that I'd listened to him. Relief that what 3 generations had built was shielded. Relief that Victoria's greed would soon consume her. I picked up my phone and called William Garrett, the attorney behind our prenup. "Bill, it's Paul. I need you to review that agreement you wrote. I think I'll be needing it soon." The legal gears were already in motion. Victoria just didn't know it yet. Soon she'd learn the difference between what she dreamed of and what the law would actually give her. And that lesson would cost her dearly. She filed for divorce on a Tuesday. I was at the yard checking inventory when Garrett called with the news. Her lawyer's petition demanded half of everything, my inheritance included. They argued the family business should be considered shared property. Almost $5 million, Bill said, plus half the company and spousal support. I wasn't shocked, but seeing the numbers on paper still hit hard. She had calculated every last cent. She even listed new equipment I'd purchased as marital property. At night, when I got home, she was packing her clothes into suitcases. Most of her jewelry was already gone. The house felt hollow, stripped of its
Warmth. "I guess you got the papers," she said, folding dresses without meeting my eyes. "I did." "Good. Then you know this doesn't have to be ugly, Paul. Give me what's mine, and we can both move on." The word mine made my jaw tighten, as if my father's legacy was a reward for 3 years in my bed. "We'll let the lawyers decide that," I said. Victoria finally looked at me, her eyes cold and calculating. "You can fight this if you want," she said. "My attorney says I have a strong case. 3 years of marriage, community property state, significant shared assets. The math's simple." She was trying to scare me, make me believe fighting was pointless. Her lawyer probably told her most men just settle. "Is that what he told you when you paid him $3,000 2 months ago?" Her hands froze mid-fold. I don't know what you're talking about." "Legal consultation, joint account, July." For the first time, she looked shaken. "I was exploring my options," she muttered. "Any smart woman would." "Any smart woman would also read her prenuptial agreement before calling a lawyer." Her face drained of color. "What prenuptial agreement?" Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept her chin high. "I was doing what any woman would do, protecting myself." "Protecting yourself from what?" I asked, my tone colder than I expected. "From the moment you stopped seeing me as your partner," she shot back. Silence filled the room, the kind that weighs more than words ever could. "You think you're the only one with power here, Paul?" For the first time, I saw something new, fear creeping into her voice. "Read the agreement, Victoria," I said quietly. "It might surprise you." She stared at me, her lips parting like she wanted to argue, but couldn't. Maybe I underestimated you, she muttered, her voice barely audible. Or maybe, I replied, you overestimated yourself. The room felt colder now, like every word spoken had stripped away the past. Victoria's shoulders slumped. What prenuptial agreement? And in that moment, I knew. She had no idea what was coming.
I almost laughed. Almost. The one you signed 3 years ago, I said. The one drafted by my father's attorney. The one you didn't bother reading. The one you said you trusted me on. Paul, you can't be serious, she scoffed. They're just scare tactics, she added. But I saw the flicker of doubt behind her eyes. She was remembering Garrett's office, the way she'd signed those pages while complaining about how unromantic it felt. Now she was starting to wonder what she'd signed. We'll see what the judge thinks, I replied. Victoria left that night and vanished. I didn't hear from her again until court. Through Bill, I learned her lawyer had requested all copies of our prenuptial agreement. Apparently, Victoria had never kept one. She had signed away millions and forgotten. The irony was almost poetic. If she'd been honest, things could have been simple. If she'd come to me openly, we might have ended things quietly, even fairly. I might have given her more than the law required. But she chose deception instead. She treated our marriage like a robbery. She plotted and schemed without knowing what protections stood in her way. Now those protections would ruin her plan. And the lesson would cost her dearly. 3 weeks before trial, Bill called me. Paul, you need to hear this, he said. I've been digging into her actions, and it's worse. I looked out my window, the sky dimming. How much worse? I asked. She's been planning this for over a year. She met with 3 separate attorneys, and she hired a private investigator. That last part hit me like a sledgehammer. A private investigator? I repeated. His name's James Murphy. He specializes in tracking assets in divorce. She paid him $8,000 to dig into everything. Your holdings, your father's estate, even your partnerships. She's got reports on everything you own. I set my coffee mug down slowly. Victoria hadn't just planned a divorce, she'd built a campaign. This was strategic, methodical, surgical.
Is there more? I asked, though I knew there was. Murphy's report even advises her, Bill said. He suggested claiming the company's growth was due to her emotional and domestic support. She plans to argue being a housewife increased your profits. The absurdity nearly made me laugh. She'd quit her job, shopped, lunched, and now she was claiming she built the empire. Did she find anything that could hurt us? I asked. That's the best part, Bell said. Murphy's report actually helps our case. It proves nearly all assets predate the marriage or were inherited. His findings show she has no legal claim. I laughed, but it was hollow. She paid $8,000 to destroy her own case. Exactly, Bill said, but there's more. I know who told her to hire Murphy. Who? I asked. Your neighbor, Stephen Davis. He had a brutal divorce 3 years ago. And he used Murphy, too. It was like betrayal layered on betrayal. The woman I loved, and now even my neighbor was part of it. The walls were closing in, but so was justice, because every step she took to trap me was now evidence that would set me free. Victoria had no idea that the battle she started was one she'd already lost. All that was left now was the verdict, and I was ready to hear it. For the first time in months, I felt calm, because now the truth was on my side, and no amount of greed could rewrite that. Let her try, I whispered. This fight is already over. The law was written to protect the innocent, and this time it was protecting me. The countdown to court had begun, and I was no longer afraid. Victoria would walk into that courtroom thinking she'd win, but she'd walk out with nothing. Not my money, not my company, and certainly not my future, because that belonged to me, and nothing she did could change that. Not anymore. The real trial wasn't about money. It was about trust and betrayal. Case.
Victoria had been leaning on Stephen for divorce tactics for months. Stephen Davis lived 2 houses down the street. I had loaned him my trailer twice when he was moving heavy furniture. His wife had left and taken half of his construction company. I felt sorry for the man and even invited him over for dinner a few times when Victoria said he looked lonely.
"Stephen has been coaching her," Bill said. Murphy's notes show Stephen told Victoria to document everything and build a story for why she deserved more than the usual split. He told her judges favor wives who put careers aside for their husbands. The betrayal cut deeper than Victoria's schemes. Stephen had sat at my table, eaten my food, accepted my help, and then coached my wife on how to gut me financially. He shared his divorce playbook, recommended his investigator, and likely helped her pick an attorney. "There is one more thing," Bill said quietly. Murphy included a short profile. Victoria told him you were emotionally soft and would likely settle instead of fight. She claimed you were too nice to mount a real legal defense. I stared out at the yard, watching a driver chain down a bulldozer on a trailer. 3 generations built this company through grit and planning, and she thought I was too weak to defend it? "Bill," I said, "prepare the most comprehensive defense you have ever written. I want Victoria to see how wrong she is about me." "With pleasure, Paul. This is going to be interesting." The week before court, I set my plan in motion. Garrett had assembled every piece we needed to dismantle her case, but I wanted the lesson to
stick. First, we moved to have Murphy's report admitted into evidence. Since she hired him, everything he found was fair for our defense. The irony could not be better. Her $8,000 fishing trip became my smoking gun. "This is excellent work," Bill said as we went through the file. Murphy shows she planned a calculated financial ambush. Judges do not like that in divorce court. But the report was only the start. We also subpoenaed Victoria's financials for the last 2 years. What we saw was a surge of reckless spending that began right after my father passed and I received the estate. Victoria had put more than $60,000 on our joint cards in the last 18 months. Designer clothes, pricey jewelry, weekend getaways with friends to Scottsdale and San Diego. She even booked a 10-day Cabo trip she called a girl's getaway and charged it to my business account. She was treating your inheritance like a shopping fund, Bill said, and now she wants a legal claim to half. The pattern told a simple truth. She saw my father's death not as loss, but as an opening. She immediately scaled up her lifestyle, acting like she had won the lottery. The inheritance was not even fully settled before she began burning through it. Then came the messages. Victoria forgot to sign out of her iCloud on our shared computer. Every text she sent for 6 months had backed up to my system. What I read made my stomach drop. She had been messaging with Stephen, and the messages were nothing short of chilling. They talked openly about strategy, using my own words against me. Stephen suggested ways to provoke me, hoping I'd slip up legally. Victoria bragged about what she'd buy once she had her half. Reading it all, I realized this was never about love. It was a heist.
Messages with Davis came in almost daily, sharing details about my company and asking him how best to dismantle me in court. But the worst part was what I found next. She had been texting her lawyer about how to disguise her reckless spending from the judge. "Can we claim the credit card charges were for family expenses?" she asked him. "We'll argue that maintaining the lifestyle was necessary," he replied. "Expected behavior in your social circle." Together they were scheming to make luxury look like necessity.
Their plan was to label her shopping addiction as household spending. They'd spend designer handbags and lavish vacations as marital obligations. It was bold and utterly shameless. The last piece of evidence sealed everything. Victoria had texted her friend Diana just 3 days earlier. "Paul has no clue what's coming," she wrote. "He's always too trusting. By the time this is over, I'll never have to work again." Bill leaned back slowly in his chair as I handed him the evidence. "Paul, this is legal misconduct if I've ever seen it," he said. "Her attorney has been actively coaching her to hide assets. The state bar will want to review this." But I wasn't interested in revenge. I didn't want to ruin a lawyer's career. I wanted justice. "What are the odds she tries to settle once she sees this?" I asked him. "0," he said without hesitation. "Her ego won't allow it. She's convinced she deserves your money. She'll fight to the bitter end." "Good," I said, "because I want her to hear the truth from the judge. I want her to see exactly what she signed 3 years ago and exactly how much it's going to cost her." The trial date was set for Monday morning. Victoria had no idea what was coming. The courtroom was packed when Judge Williams called the case. Victoria sat proudly at the plaintiff's table, her confidence radiating in a deep navy dress. Her attorney was flanked by a mountain of paperwork, his expression that of a man smelling a fortune. "I'm taking 70% of everything, including your father's estate," Victoria declared. Her arrogance drew gasps and whispers from the gallery. Her friends had come to witness her big victory. And there he was, Stephen Davis, smirking from the back row like he'd already won. Judge Williams listened patiently as Victoria's lawyer spoke. He painted her as a devoted wife who'd sacrifice everything, supported my dreams, and helped build my success. When my turn came, I rose calmly and walked to the bench. In my hand, 2 documents, the prenup and her own report.
Your Honor, I said evenly, I'd like to submit these. Judge Williams opened the folder. His eyebrows arched immediately. He flipped through the prenup and Murphy's findings. I watched his expression shift from curiosity to disbelief, and then to something dangerously close to amusement. Victoria's confidence began to crack. She glanced nervously at her lawyer. He leaned forward, squinting, desperate to know what I'd handed over. When the judge finished reading, he looked directly at me. "Mr. Blake, is this investigator's report accurate?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. "Mrs. Blake hired Mr. Murphy. And this is the evidence he uncovered." The courtroom had gone completely silent now. Every eye was locked on Victoria as the weight of the truth settled in. Her empire of lies was finally beginning to crumble. The judge turned back to her attorney, his tone sharp. "Counselor, were you aware of these communications?" The man swallowed hard before shaking his head. I didn't need to say another word. The evidence spoke for itself. Victoria stared down at the table, her hands trembling. For the first time, I saw fear replace greed in her eyes. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about consequences. Consequences she never thought she'd face. The courtroom, once buzzing with her confidence, now belonged to the truth. And for the first time in years, I felt in control. Victoria's carefully built fantasy was collapsing around her, and the final blow was still to come. When the judge spoke next, everyone leaned in. "Mrs. Blake, we need to discuss the terms of the agreement you signed." The look on her face said it all. She finally realized she had lost. No amount of manipulation could undo what she'd signed away. And now every greedy choice had come full circle. The courtroom, once her battlefield, had become her reckoning. And I was no longer the man she thought she could destroy. I was the one holding all the cards now, and the game was finally over.
To investigate my assets for this divorce, the judge glanced at Victoria, then her lawyer, then back down at the papers on his bench. He took a breath and kept reading. And then something unexpected happened. Judge Williams chuckled, a short, surprised laugh. He straightened, cleared his throat, and addressed Victoria directly. "Mrs. Blake, according to this prenuptial agreement that you signed, you waive any claim to Mr. Blake's premarital assets and inherited property. Did you read this agreement before you signed it?" Victoria's face drained of color. "Your Honor, that document was coercive. I was pressured into signing." "By whom?" "By his father and his attorney. They said if I did not sign, there would be no wedding." Judge Williams looked back at the file. "I see here you had independent counsel review this agreement. You were represented by attorney Michael Foster. Did he not explain the terms to you?" I do not remember." "You do not remember your own lawyer explaining a document that affected millions of dollars?" Victoria's attorney rose. "Your Honor, we move to challenge the validity of the prenuptial agreement." "On what grounds?" "Unconscionability. The terms are grossly unfair to my client." Judge Williams set the file down and regarded Victoria with visible disapproval. "Mrs. Blake, you hired a private investigator to catalog your husband's assets to claim them in this divorce. You spent $60,000 on luxuries while planning this case. You consulted multiple attorneys to maximize your payout, and now you ask the court to void a contract you chose not to read?" The room went still. Her friends stopped whispering. Stephen Davis stared down to his shoes. "The prenuptial agreement is valid and enforceable," Judge Williams ruled. "Mrs. Blake is entitled to half of assets acquired during the marriage, minus debts she incurred. Based on the evidence, that total is approximately $15,000. Victoria gasped as if struck. Court is adjourned. The agreement left her with the credit card
Debt she created and no share of what she expected. She had chased a fortune and found a ledger full of red ink. Within 6 months, she filed for bankruptcy. Job interviews dried up as word spread about her schemes. The same friends who cheered in court stopped returning her calls. Stephen moved away quietly once his part in the coaching became public. In Phoenix, the story traveled fast. Dates were canceled, invitations vanished, and the glow of her social circle faded. I took a portion of my protected inheritance and funded free legal workshops for small business owners on asset protection. It felt like honoring my father's lessons. His caution had saved our legacy. Maybe it could safeguard someone else's. I found peace in the quiet that followed, knowing the truth had held. Sometimes those who mistake kindness for weakness give you the clearest view of who they are, and the clearest reminder of who you must be. Protect what you build, guard what you love, and never confuse love with calculation. That was the last lesson my father taught me, and the first one I will pass on. Because some empires are made of steel, and some are made of trust. Only one survives a storm like this. I locked the office, stepped into the sun, and breathed easy at last. My life was still mine, my future was still open, and my father's legacy was intact. In the end, truth had been the best defense and the surest foundation. The gavel echo faded from memory. What stayed was the lesson. Real love builds. Calculation only takes.